Have you tried adding tabs to your DocGrid journal? It's a great way to make it easy to flick between your most used high traffic spreads. I've set some up for my reading journal for 2025, but you could make use of tabs in any journal situation and at any point of the journal, as long as that journal has decently thick paper. I'm going to show you how I like to set up tabs for my own journals. Hi, I'm Erin, and apparently I love cutting bits out of my notebooks. The first thing you need to take into account when adding tabs to your journal is the size of the notebook and the paper it has inside. I'm using this A5 notebook, which has nice sturdy 160 GSM paper. I wouldn't recommend making tabs in a journal with a paper weight below 120 GSM because the paper needs to be pretty robust to withstand being handled a lot. This journal also has DocGrid paper, which will make calculating the size of your tabs a lot easier. It's helpful to know how many tabs you want to make, so it can be a good idea to assign a purpose to each of your pages or spreads before you jump into making the tabs. This way you'll know how many you need to account for. For demonstrative purposes, I'll be making 5 tabs in this journal. Next, it's important to know your page dimensions with regards to the DocGrid. Most DocGrid journals have dots spaced 5mm apart, and usually an A5 journal will have 38 DocGrid spaces vertically and 26 DocGrid spaces horizontally, although they can vary, so make sure you check yours if you aren't sure. For purposes of tabs, the page width isn't so important. We'll be mostly focused on the vertical measurements. If you're using a different journal size like B5, Square, Travelers, or A6, you'll have different DocGrid dimensions to this. You may also like to consider the space above the top row of dots and below the bottom row of dots as their own space. I'm going to count these top and bottom areas of the page as their own spaces, which is going to leave me with 40 DocGrid spaces from top to bottom. This divides really nicely by my 5 tabs into the number 8, which means I now know each of my tabs will be 8 DocGrid spaces tall. If you divide your DocGrid height by the number of tabs you want and it comes out to something really uneven, like 6.4, I'll usually round down in that circumstance to the nearest whole number and just let my tabs have a little bit of extra space left over at the top or bottom of the page. Now let's go through the pages and draft where our tabs will go. I'd usually do this in pencil so I can erase any leftover marks later or change things up if I made a mistake, but I'm going to use a fine liner so you can see what I'm doing. Firstly, I like my tabs kind of large, so I like them to be 2 DocGrid spaces wide, if we consider that outside edge past the last row of dots to be its own space. You can make them just 1 space wide if you prefer, especially if you want to make a lot of smaller tabs, or you can make them wider than this if you like. Now I'm going to map out the tabs just on the front page, counting 8 spaces down from the top and adding a line there to denote that that's where the first tab will end and the second one will start. I'm going to continue that process all the way down the page until I have my 5 tabs all delineated. They'll all be the same height, so I'm going to count down 8 DocGrid spaces every time. Next, once you've got those spaces all marked out on the first page, I recommend adding a number into the tab that's going to remain on this page, so basically putting a 1 in the space at the top for the first tab, so that you know when you're cutting that this is the spot you don't want to remove from the page. Now I'm going to transfer those markings onto all of the other pages that I plan to cut tabs into, and I'm just doing this by pushing the page back enough that it reveals those first 2 rows of the outside edge and copying my lines over from the DocGrid, so it's a very easy way to move those measurements across. I'm also adding the number into each of the tabs as I go, so the second page will have the second tab. I'm adding a 2 in that space. This time I'm going to add a 3 in the third tab. On the next spread we'll add a 4 in the 4 tab and so on until we get to the bottom of the page, which is the 5 in this case. Now we've done all the planning for our tabs, it's time to get into actually cutting them, which is the scary part. I'm going to show you 3 different ways to cut them, and the first and most standard is just with a pair of scissors. These ones have a very short blade on them. I would actually recommend going for scissors with a longer blade if you can get your hands on some, because that way you're going to have a much straighter cut. If you have to make several smaller cuts like this, you're less likely to get a nice straight line than you would with a much longer blade. But I was lazy and was just using what was available on my desk at the time, so these are the scissors I'm going to go with. And I'm using my scissors to cut from the very bottom of the page all the way up to the bottom of the area we've demarcated as the first tab with the number 1 in it. So I'm just going to cut up to that line and then horizontally directly across from that line to have a kind of a square bottom edge on that tab. Then we'll turn the page and we'll cut out tab number 2. I'm going to use a different method for this one. This time I'm going to use a craft knife, maybe you call this a Stanley knife or an X-Acto knife where you are. And anytime you're using a knife on your journal, I really recommend you pop a little cutting mat underneath so you aren't damaging the pages that sit behind the one that you intend to cut. I also recommend cutting along the edge of a ruler if you want to get nice, sharp, crispy lines. And because you're using a knife to do that, I recommend using a metal ruler so it's nice and robust and you're not damaging the ruler with the edge of the blade as you cut along it. This time I'm cutting from the top down to the top of the second tab, and then from the bottom of the second tab down to the bottom of the page. That's our first two tabs fully cut, and you can see the tabs are starting to sort of form here. They're sitting on top of each other in this kind of cascading way. Next, we're going to do the third one, and this is the best way to get a really straight line, in my opinion, is to use one of these straight edge cutting blade tools. I find they work really well in A5 journals, although I haven't had much luck with them in some of the other journal sizes if the pages are too big to fit in this, or if they are too narrow for you to get it kind of under the page in your journal. The trick here is stopping your cut in time that you don't accidentally cut off the whole tab that you want to keep, which is very easy to do with one of these machines. On mine, the blade sits right in the middle of the little blue movable thing, so it was very easy to line up the handle of that with the line that I was cutting up to, and then I'm just going to use my scissors to make those little horizontal cuts and remove that bit of paper. Whichever one of these methods feels the most comfortable to you, you should absolutely use. You don't have to buy any extra stuff. If you just have scissors, then you can do this with just scissors and your tabs will still turn out wonderfully. We've still got two more tabs to cut, so I'm going to use my straight edge tool for those as well, and we'll just speed things up a little bit here because I feel like you're getting the picture. Here we have the bare bones of our tabs. You can see they're all cut out, they're even, they sit nicely on top of each other. You can see each of them, none of them are obscuring the one that's underneath. If you like square edges, then you could leave the tabs in this shape and just move on to the decorating step and you would be just fine. I like mine to have that sort of trapezoid shape though, so I'm going to do a little bit more cutting to mine before we move on to making them really pretty. Also, we don't need any of the pencil lines or the numbers anymore, so feel free to go ahead and erase those. Here's how I like to get that little trapezoid shape. This is easiest to do when the tabs are sitting closest to you on the table, so you can turn your journal sideways to get better access. And using your scissors, I like to come in one dot grid space from the edge of the tab and cut from that dot grid space diagonally down to the outside of the next space, or to the edge of the page if that is what is the closest thing rather than an actual dot. If you've made your tabs 2 dot grid spaces wide like I have, then you might find this is giving you a really steep diagonal line like I'm getting here, or if you've made your tabs only 1 dot grid space wide, just from the last row of dots to the edge of the page, you won't have such a steep diagonal cut, but you can still get a really nice tab effect if you use this system, going from 1 dot grid space in, down to the page edge. We're going to repeat that across all of the tabs. Now that the shapes of the tabs are refined, we can move on to making them really pretty, which is my favorite part. I have 2 main ways I like to approach this, so I'll show you first what I did in my reading journal, and that is just to color in each of the tabs with a marker and add the title of each page onto it. This can be a really swift way to navigate between your pages if you flick between things really frequently. It saves you from leafing through and looking at what each one is and just takes you directly to the page that you need. If you like this idea but you're not a huge fan of your handwriting, you can always print the headings that you need here and just size them down to the correct size that you need. It should be pretty easy to work that out based on the 5mm dot grid spacing. And for extra ease of navigation, I've also added headings onto the back of my tabs too. But I'm not doing tabs for an actual purpose for this video, so I'm going to show you my other method, which is washi tape. I've chosen 5 of my favorites from Paper Monogatari, but if you have a set of washi tapes that all came together, that can be a really good option because they'll already look fantastic together. And you don't actually need a separate washi tape for every tab. You could just keep using the same pattern of 3 over and over, or alternate, or whatever else you like the look of. You could make a rainbow, whatever you like. I'm placing my trusty cutting mat behind my tab here to make cutting around it really easy with the craft knife, but you could also just do this with scissors if you didn't have a craft knife handy or you felt like that would be easier. I'm covering the tab with my washi tape, and I'm going to flick the tab over to the opposite side so that I can see it from the underside, place my cutting mat behind it again, and then just trim off the excess washi tape from around it. I find the craft knife is the quickest way to do this for me because being able to see the shape of the tab from the underside, you can really just trace over the edges with the knife and follow along the edge of the page, and it's very quick and efficient and easy. But as always, scissors would do the job just as well, and I also like to cover the back side of the tab with the same washi tape. You could alter the washi tape if you wanted to use a different one if you prefer, or you can not decorate the back of the tab if you prefer that idea too. And I'm going to cut off the excess again. I didn't find I needed to flip the tab back to the other side to see it from here. I could kind of see the tab through the tape, but if you need to, you can always flip it back to the other side so that you can really clearly see that shape. Then we're going to repeat that exact same process for every one of our tabs, just covering it with washi tape, trimming off the excess, adding some more washi tape onto the back and trimming off the excess there too. If you do like to use a few different styles of washi tape with different patterns to do this kind of thing, I recommend alternating between lighter and darker ones so you have some fun contrast going on. And if you like to make themes for groups of pages in whatever kind of journal you're working in here, I recommend that you also use those washi tapes throughout the theme so that things feel really cohesive and they all look really nice together. Once we've got the washi tape down on this last tab, we'll be all done setting up these tabs for this video and for this demonstration. And do you know who really likes tabs? Apparently my cat Mitsu, because he came to tell me I'd done a really good job. And maybe to micromanage me a little bit, because I noticed the 5 was visible through the washi tape on the bottom one here because the tape I chose was quite a light color, so you could see the 5 through it. That wouldn't be an issue if you didn't plan out all of your things in fine liner like I did. If you just did pencil, it wouldn't be visible, but it's nothing a little bit of correction tape couldn't fix. And I guess my little micromanager Mitsu agreed because he came back to tell me that he liked it much better this way. That's what I'm telling myself. He was actually coming to ask for his dinner, but we will pretend that's not the case. Hopefully I've inspired you to give tabs a go in your journal if you've never tried them before. I promise they are not as difficult to achieve as they look. If you've tried tabs before and run into some issues, hopefully some of my tips will help you make a better go of them the next time that you try. And if you're a seasoned tab including pro and you have some tips I didn't mention in this video, please leave them in the comments so we can make the comment section a resource for any journalers wanting to make amazing tabs. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, make sure that you leave a black cat emoji in your comment down below in honor of my very insistent, very hungry cat who's appearing quite a bit here. I'm gonna go get him that dinner that he's asking for. But if you'd like to keep watching, I also have a video similar to this one, but all about waterfall tabs, so if you'd like to learn to add those to your journal, you can check that video out. I also have another video just about how to make your journal more beautiful in general, so you can check that one out too if you're looking for some artistic tips.